everyone, welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today we're on a bit of an adventure. We're on our way, hopefully, to a fellow Morris Minor owner to collect a few windows for spares that's not too far away from us. We're currently sitting in some traffic, but the fellow Morris Minor owner that we're going to collect some parts from is a young Morris Minor owner as well, so I thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to record today's podcast on the topic of being a young owner and what got me into classic car ownership as a young person. And today's quirk of classic car ownership also fits pretty well with today's theme, and that is the way that some people look surprised when they realise who's driving this Morris Minor. I don't know if just generally classic cars get this, or if it's that Morris Minors have a particular image of who is driving them, but quite often you will see someone smiling in the distance as Peggy is approaching, and then when they kind of clock my face, they get a little bit surprised that it's a young driver who is driving the car. So, like I said, today's topic is about young people getting into classic car ownership. It's a really interesting and topical point of discussion within classic car clubs, because there's a real need to get young people involved in the clubs to keep the cars on the roads, and some cars are managing to draw in young drivers and some are not so much. There's been lots of schemes that have started in recent years looking at trying to improve this. There's been the opportunity for young people to hire a classic car for the summer, and the insurance and things like that are kind of included in this package deal, and they get the opportunity to see if classic car ownership is something that would interest them. There's events such as driving kind of closed events in other people's cars, sometimes younger than even being able to drive a modern car, to really get a feel for these. And there's been a real move in recent years from certain clubs to make sure that insurers are happy to insure young people on their brand of classic car. And these have been really interesting developments to see starting to filtrate into the classic car movement, and hopefully they start to have a positive effect. So what's really important to note is that there's really no one way of success. I know kids that hung out on the scene with me when I was really small who just didn't carry on with classic cars, have got no interest now. And I know kids that have come into it much later than I did, and so I just thought I would share my experience of being involved with classic cars from really a very, very young age, and how that impacted me. So to begin my story, we have to begin really right at the beginning. I came home from hospital when I was born in a 1969 Singer Vogue that my parents owned and used as a second car at the time. And that's the fun fact that I like to tell people when doing fun little icebreakers and things like that. Throughout my childhood, my dad also consistently owned at least two 1930s cars that we used as show cars. To begin with, this was CMT, a two-seater Singer Le Mans that he had owned since the 80s and briefly used as a daily driver. We were then joined by Nelly, the 4-seater version, where my mum told him that there was no way we were strapping a baby to the parcel shelf of the 2-seater. Later, when CMT was sold, we added Emma, the 4-seater saloon, to our fleet. Realise and notice less is that actually our second cars that we were pottering about in quite locally were also classic cars. There was even a brief moment where my parents owned a Morris Minor before they swapped it for a Riley Elf that my parents found more comfortable to drive. But there were Vogues as well, quite a few Vogues and Singer cars as well, and Roots, Hillman Imps that were all throughout my childhood cars that we were using on a pretty regular basis. There's plenty of pictures of me out in these cars with my booster seats in them, and I'll perhaps insert a few of these for those of you that are watching on YouTube. And I think that normalised these classic cars even more so. Because of all these classic cars in our life, we also had a lot of friends and family members who were interested in cars, and that definitely played a big part in my interest, because not only were these classic car weekends a chance to see other cars, they were a chance to meet up with friends and family and see their cars and have really fun weekends. This carried on pretty much throughout my entire childhood. I remember lots of summers being filled with various different car shows, meeting up with friends and family that otherwise we might not see, and having summers with picnics and taking our cars out for the day. Additionally, I can remember that a lot of the time our family holidays were tied in with national weekends. Even recently, we took our car, Emma, to a national weekend in Norfolk, and then tied on the end of it a holiday where we used Emma as our daily driver there. Now, lots of kids that I know, like I've said, started off going to these shows with their parents, and then there comes a point where you start noticing that quite a few of these kids stop attending. But for some reason, both me and my sister carried on going, and I've got lots of theories as to why this might be. One being that I was just very interested in lots of things from this period, and just generally vintage things. There was a period in my teenage years where I was really into anything and everything mod. I loved the music, I loved the idea of owning a Vespa, and I had a birthday treat where we went to Brighton for the weekend and I recreated scenes from Quadrophenia. And so my interest in things vintage carried on throughout my teenage years, and I have consistently carried on going to car shows with my parents. And then when it came to deciding what car I wanted to own, the idea of owning a car that would allow me to carry on a hobby that I've had my entire life seemed like a really good option. Yes, Peggy would not allow me to get into some of the 40s weekends that I've recently got into through my choice of clothing. However, a lot of the other shows will allow her in as a classic and a vintage, and I can still meet up with friends and family in the way that I've been doing all my life. So what do I think needs to change? I think it's really important for all clubs to work really hard on making sure that there's involvement for young people attending these shows. Lots of clubs now have young members clubs, and they're a really useful thing to encourage people to thinking that actually there is going to be young people at these events. Additionally, I think it's really important for the clubs to work really hard to work with insurers, as they have been, to make sure that there's going to be insurers who will allow us to drive these cars. Because if we can't drive them, we're sure as heck not going to buy them. I also think it's a real shame when I see a lot of gatekeeping happening within some of these classic car clubs. They can be a little bit elitist when it comes to people making modifications that make their cars more usable and more friendly to what they need. If we want young people to carry on being involved in this hobby, we've got to stop kind of gatekeeping and saying that there's not the option there for them to make the modifications that make the cars enjoyable to them. Additionally, car clubs need to work on making sure that the support that some clubs offer becomes universal. I've been really fortunate when things have happened with Peggy, that a quick message in the Facebook group has meant that I have been able to make adjustments and things very quickly and get back on the road and get motoring. But those options aren't available for all marques of classic car, and it means that they might not survive as long as, for example, the Morrises seem to be. I think events that we've seen happening where young people, I've seen videos of 12-year-olds driving our cars around circuits that are designed for that purpose, and I think that's brilliant. And if I'd have had the chance for that when I was younger, I'd have probably been inclined to buy a car even sooner than I did. I'd be really interested to find out what it is that's encouraged you to buy your classic car and why you think young drivers are joining the scene, are dropping out of the scene, and what's keeping people interested in our cars. Thanks so much for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.